This week in CIST 1530, we'll look at Chapter 6, Design with Essential Blending Modes and Filters. First, we think of blending modes as a mathematical algorithm. It's going to define how pixels affect the pixels on layers beneath them. So inside Photoshop in our layers panel, they're going to have 27 different blending modes. This includes our normal blending mode. So many of these you'll use often, and some of these you might never ever use. Now, blending modes can be used to create special effects, but the most essential blending modes are also going to have highly practical functions as well. So some of the blending modes we'll look at is the darken blending mode. The darken blending modes include darken, multiply, color burn, linear burn, and darken color. So with these modes, white pixels are going to become invisible, and black pixels are going to be unaffected and they're going to remain opaque. These modes darken the areas that they overlap. The light blending modes include the lighten, screen, color dodge, linear dodge, and lighter color. These modes, when you are applied, the black pixels are going to become invisible, and the white pixels are going to be unaffected and remain opaque. So these modes are going to lighten the areas that they overlap. The overlay blending modes include overlay, soft light, hard light, vivid light, linear light, pen light, and hard mix. Now these modes, the gray pixels are going to become invisible, and all pixels become transparent. These modes increase the contrast and saturation where these pixels overlap. The hue blending modes, these include hue, saturation, color, and luminosity. So these modes affect the color of the pixels, specifically in terms of their hue and saturation and their brightness. So you see an example of the layers panel of where you can change the different blend modes, and the example of the 27 different blending options you have. Now, when you're thinking of blending modes, it's a good idea to think of these understanding as these blending modes of three colors. You have your base color, that's the color of the pixels on the lower level or the lower layer. The blend color is the color above it on the layer with the blending mode applied. And finally, the result color. That's the color that's going to be produced by these blending the base and the blend colors. So we see an example here where we have our normal mode and our multiply mode. So this is where you can see the result of the two being blended together. Now the multiply blending mode this is one of the first blending modes that most new Photoshop users encounter, primarily because it makes white pixels invisible and all colors appear see-through, except for black. Now the calculation for the multiply blending mode is 1 pixel times 2 pixels divided by 255, and that's going to equal X pixel number 3. So in this case, pixel 1 is your base color, pixel 2 is the blend color, and pixel 3 is the result color. And it's going to be divided by the 255 gray. As we see some calculations of how the blending modes are calculated in the multiply mode. Now your layers panel also gives you the ability to use groups, which are like folders. And these are used to organize your layers. This is something that's very helpful when you're working with multiple layers. You can group these layers so that the components that go together are put in the same group. You can use them to segregate different components of the project. It's there to make the layers panel more manageable. Now, by default, when you create a layers group, that blending mode is going to be set to pass through. This mode indicates that the group functions only as an organization tool to house the layers, and it's not anything more complicated than that. So the act of grouping layers will cause no changes to how layers with blending modes applied to them will affect one another or how they affect images outside of the group. Now, the normal blending mode, when you apply normal mode to groups, uh, this prohibits blending modes on layers in the group from affecting images outside of the group. So you can think of group set to normal mode as being a collection of isolated layers. Let's see an example of a group here in the folder. The blend mode is set to normal, and it will not affect the images outside of that group. Now, an adjustment layer inside a group, such as the hue and saturation or levels, this affects artwork outside the group only when that group is set to pass through. So if the group is set to any other blending mode, the adjustment layer inside the group affects only the layers inside of that group. The screen blending mode, this functions as the exact opposite of the multiply blending mode. So in the screen blending mode, the black pixels become invisible and the white pixels are unaffected and remain opaque. So regardless of what colors are used, the screen mode always lightens the overlapped area and all colors except white become transparent. The overlay blending mode, this is a blending mode that adds contrast where images and colors fields are overlapped. Now, because it adds contrast, overlay lightens some parts of an image and it does darken others. So the overlay blending mode shows that the gray pixels, especially those that are 128 at the middle of the grayscale, become invisible when overlaid. Now, any pixels that are lighter than 128, they lighten the image as they increase to 255. Pixels darker than 128 darken the image as they decrease to 0. Let's see some examples of images overlaid with black, gray, and white and the results. Now, sharpening is a technique that's for making images appear less blurred and more in focus. When you sharpen digital images, this is something that's become necessary because digital cameras have the anti-alias function in the lens. They can blur images slightly when it's captured to avoid artificial patterns. Now, by understanding sharpening with overlay mode, this requires you to understand two concepts: the edges and the results of the overlaying an image on top of itself. Now, when we talk about edges, the term edges in Photoshop refers to the area of the image where highly contrasting pixels meet. So think of that black and white checkerboard. This is a good example of image with extreme edges because you have so many white pixels that line up against so many black pixels. So when you position a copy of an image on a layer on top of itself, then apply the overlay blending mode, the results is a dramatic increase in contrast. So when you sharpen with overlay blending mode, this utilizes the two concepts via high pass filter, which fills a layer with gray. So the high pass filter allows you to manipulate the radius, and that's the value that determines how many pixels to change on each side of the edge. So when you increase the radius, the gray fill is gradually removed from the edges of the image. And when you do that, you can say those edge areas have been exposed. As we see an example here of a high pass filter applied. You can also add noise. Now, noise is created by using the add noise filter, and this refers to tiny random pixel-sized squares of colors or gray. So when you overlay them, they're going to create a texture over the image, similar to grain you might see in a conventional photography. Now, it also does a great job of hiding any subtle flaws that are left behind, such as the softness from brush edges, alias in from mask, or maybe some kind of subtle color halos from the hue and saturation adjustments. So we see the add noise filter. Once again, you can choose some different settings, the amount, the percentage amount, the distribution, and so forth. Now, the overlay and soft light blending mode. So, the overlay blending mode brings a more rich, vibrant, and intense color. It's going to result in the images that take on a heightened reality and shine as though it's lit from within. The soft light is basically a baby overlay. So, in this, it's going to produce similar effects to the overlay blending mode, except the soft light is going to be less intense. The hue blending mode, when you use this, all the pixels below the solid color will take on the hue of 10. The saturation blending mode, in this, all the pixels will take on the saturation of 80. The color blending mode, pixels will take on both the hue of 10 and the saturation of 80. And the luminosity blending mode is going to set the brightness for those pixels to a brightness of 70. As we see some examples here of things that can be accomplished by using the different types of blending modes. The first one, you have a gritty desaturation effect with the overlay blending mode. You can use blending modes to make your artwork more vivid. Or you can also use it to bring out the deep, rich colors in your blending mode as well.